Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and what a delight to have back with us, and an honor, quite honestly, to have David Barton with us. He's the president and founder of WallBuilders and the author of a book that is, well, let's put it this way. I think it's very interesting and very informative, but it's turned out to be somewhat controversial, and that is the book entitled The Jefferson Lies. By the way, wallbuilders.com is one of the premier websites in the country for you to learn about Christian history in the United States. And let me encourage you to go there, take advantage of the resources and all the books and the material. It is fantastic. David, good to see you, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. It's good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. The book doing well in spite of all the issues?
It's doing really well. Amazon can't seem to keep it in stock. It continues to run very high. I think it busted up right at the top. And so every day they're ordering new, trying to keep it in stock. So it's doing really well. Thanks for asking.
You bet. So what is the controversy about the book?
Well, the controversy about the book is there are some academics who want Jefferson to be something he's not, and that's a secularist, anti-Christian guy. Jefferson is very firmly pro-religious liberties, pro-conscience. He's very firmly pro-religious expression, and by me putting out a book that shows him to be that way, that goes counter to the way that the courts and the political guys use Jefferson. They use him to try to secularize the public square. Jefferson would vehemently object, so I give Jefferson's viewpoint, and they don't like that because it goes counter to where they want the culture to go.
Okay, but they can't deny the facts. It's there.
No, they can't deny the facts. They try to obfuscate them. They say, well, Jefferson actually said this, and you know, they go off into tangential areas. But when you come back into what Jefferson actually says repeatedly, time and again, it's pretty unequivocally clear that the academics that are criticizing this are certainly off base on this one.
Okay, let's get into some of these. By the way, it was the president mentioned President Jefferson during his speech at the mosque, trying to refer his interpretation of Muslims, and received quite a bit of pushback. What was your take on that?
Well, he should have received a lot of pushback on that. He has used Jefferson repeatedly to try to move forward an agenda that Jefferson would absolutely oppose. You have to remember, Jefferson is the first president to actually conduct a literal war on terror. He fought Islamicists, Muslim extremists, Muslim terrorists for a number of years. He was very familiar with their beliefs. He was the first diplomat appointed to negotiate with Muslim terrorists in 1784. 2 years later, he was in London and asked one of the Muslim ambassadors, why is it you guys attack us? We've done nothing to you. And they said, our religion demands that we do that. Our Quran orders us to do that and to make slaves out of you. And if we get killed in battle, we're going to heaven. And Jefferson said, no way. You go to heaven for killing people? So at that point, he and John Adams went out and bought Qurans, and they studied the Quran. Well, the president makes a big deal of the fact that Jefferson owns a Quran, shows how favorable he is toward Islam, and Islam affected his life. No, he read the Quran to say, you got to be kidding. Matter of fact, at the end of 5 years on-the-ground conflict with Jefferson sending the Marines to right where we're fighting today, Tripoli and Benghazi and Egypt, etc., at the end of Jefferson's administration, they came out with this book. This is the first Quran printed in America, printed at the end of Jefferson's administration, and they're begging Americans, please read the Quran. Please read this. And this is what they say. The introduction here is given. And at the end of the Quran, this is what they tell Americans. If you'll read the Quran, it says, thou will wonder that such absurdities have infected the best part of the world, and will avouch that the knowledge of what is contained in this book, the Quran, will render that law contemptible. They said, Americans, if you read the Quran, you will find out this is not a religion of peace. This is not a religion that you can negotiate with and deal with. Everything opposite to what the president's saying. And so he uses Jefferson, and he really is portraying Jefferson exactly opposite what Jefferson was in his administration.
Wow. Okay. Now, before you wrote the book, after you wrote the book, this has popped up. So do you think this is another reason why your book will be controversial?
Well, the book doesn't deal with Jefferson per se. I've done a different piece totally. It's an interesting thing because Jefferson's considered by the modern Democrats to be a founder of the Democrat Party. And they have heralded him that way on their website for years. And this year they've started saying, well, we're not going to do our Jefferson-Jackson Day dinners anymore. We got to get rid of Jefferson. So there's a push now saying, let's get Jefferson off the nickel. Let's get Jefferson off Mount Rushmore. Let's get rid of the Jefferson Memorial. We got to get Jefferson out of the society. He's a really bad guy. Well, we address part of that in the book, but in addition to that, I just flat point out there's no way that Jefferson would be part of the Democrat Party today. I mean, Jefferson spoke very clearly on LGBT issues, exactly opposite where Democrats are. Jefferson spoke about gun control, how bad it was, just the opposite of where Democrats are. He said never let the government get into debt, and definitely don't go into deficit spending, just the opposite of where they are. You go through religious liberties, there's 15 areas where the Jefferson is just the opposite. So I can understand why the Democrats don't want Jefferson around, but what happens is people try to say, well, he's something he wasn't, and that's what we cover in the book, is Jefferson was very clearly a civil rights guy. He's one of the biggest leaders for emancipation. Even though he owned slaves, he tried to free his own. His state would not allow him. So he's noted by black leaders for centuries as being one of the chief abolition guys. I mean, that's the kind of stuff we don't hear about Jefferson today, and so he's being pushed aside. But even in the book, I don't get into the Islamic stuff, but even in that regard, Jefferson said, you know, the only way you can defeat Muslim terrorists is not by a pullback, is by a surge. You have to have military surges, exactly the opposite of what we're doing today.
Very interesting. All right, now at the Jefferson Memorial, if you've never been there, let me suggest this is one of the memorials you have to go when you're in Washington, D.C. It is just packed full of scriptures and certainly evidence of God, and yet he is promoted as a deist, that somehow that is going to soften his Christian conviction. Can you help me with that one?
Yeah, that's a great point, because when you walk into the Jefferson Memorial, and this was done under FDR, the Jefferson Memorial, they have gone through his 100 volumes of writings. They've taken out what they consider to be his greatest quotes. So as you stand there by that 19-foot-high bronze statue, you look around you, and there are 4 tableaus of stone with Jefferson quotes engraved in them. And around the top, around the dome, is a 5th quote. 4 of the 5 quotes are absolutely God-centered. Now, it's interesting, he's considered to be a deist, one of our least religious founding fathers, and yet 80% of the political rhetoric they chose is God-centered. This actually happens to be the very first book that Jefferson wrote. This is his Notes on the State of Virginia. This is what they quote inside the Jefferson Memorial. This is where he said, God, who gave us life, gave us liberty. And can the liberties of a nation be thought secure if we've removed their only firm basis, which is a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are the gift of God, that they're not to be violated, but with His wrath? Jefferson says, listen up, folks, the only basis of our national liberties is to know that they came from God, and if you mess around with them, you're going to tick Him off, and then we're all going to be in trouble. Wow. That's our least religious founding father, and they're calling him a deist? Not by a long shot. So that's what, again, we bring out in the book and show Jefferson's actual religious beliefs as opposed to the way he's portrayed today. But you're right, if you go inside the Jefferson Memorial, it is astounding how religious that memorial is on the inside.
It really is. I have been there several times, and one time I was there like at 4:30 in the morning, and I was overwhelmed with what I saw and read. So it's quite an emotional experience to go there. All right, let's get into some of these lies, David. You bring out 7 of the big ones here. Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson fathered Sally Hemings' children.
Well, we heard that big time because back in November of 1998, Science and Nature magazine ran an announcement. Joseph Ellis, Pulitzer Prize-winning historian, wrote the article, said, well, we now know it. Jefferson fathered children. He fathered the children of Sally Hemings, a slave. And so that ran across the country, and people heard that. There were more than 220 news stories nationally that ran on that. It was alive for weeks. What no one heard was that 6 weeks later, they retracted the story. They said, oops, sorry, the DNA evidence didn't prove that. Well, as it turns out, they never even used Jefferson's DNA in the testing. And it would seem like if you're going to test somebody for paternity, you would use their DNA. They never did that. Less than a dozen news outlets carried the retraction of that. So to this day, we still continue to think, oh, Jefferson fathered children. I heard it in the news. And I talk to universities all the time. I was with a group of kids recently, and these are kids that are born after this story came out. I said, how many of you have been told by your professors that Jefferson fathered the children of slave Sally Hemings? 95% raised their hand. So this is something we're continuing to keep alive today, but it's not a true story. And that's what's significant, is we have an impression of who Jefferson is, but it's not based on fact or reality. Amazing.
Christian, or I should say historic revisionists being what they are. All right, let me get one more before we take a break here, David. The Thomas Jefferson founded a secular university.
Yeah, we hear that a lot today. There's a lot of, I start each chapter by quoting from academics and writers and professors, and they all say, oh, Jefferson started the first secular university in the nation. And the reason we know that it's a secular university is he didn't have a chaplain at the university. Well, I did an academic book with 3 other professors, and that was their claim. And so I just walked across the library here, and we're surrounded by about 100,000 documents from before 1812. So I walked across the library and picked up some newspapers that had ads on the University of Virginia. And the ads were written by the chaplain of the University of Virginia. And they said, wait, but he didn't have a chaplain. Well, here's the chaplain writing ads. What happened is Jefferson, unlike other universities, every university back then, Harvard and Yale and Princeton and Dartmouth and William and Mary, all of them, they were started for particular denominations. And so you had a clergyman from that denomination as the president, a clergyman from that denomination as the chaplain, and you had a clergyman from that denomination as the professor of theology. Jefferson said, I want this university to serve all Christian denominations. He invited every Christian denomination to come to the University of Virginia, start a seminary there. He said, this is for all Christians. And by the way, he invited Jews as well. It was a biblical approach. And so by taking that, he said, we'll have a lot of professors of theology, but they're not going to be from one denomination. So the chaplaincy actually rotated between 4 denominations. 1 year it was the Baptists, 1 year it was the Methodists, 1 year it was the Presbyterians. And today people say, oh, he didn't have a chaplain like every other university, so it was a secular university, which is nonsense. That's not, as a matter of fact, Jefferson's own writings, he made sure the kids were instructed in the Christian religion. He made sure that the library was filled with writers of Christian religion. He made sure that there was services every week. He said the kids would attend divine service every week. I mean, he was very emphatic that it was not a secular university, but we get told that today by academics, and they're wrong.
So how do academics respond to you when you come back with this stuff?
Usually they'd say, oh, you haven't been trained in history. You don't have a PhD. Well, that's true. All I've got is the original documents. I'm sorry, I don't have the PhD. Actually, I do have the PhD, but I've got the original documents as well. I just don't consider myself an academic. I consider myself a lover of truth. And so I want to see what the actual historical truth is, which is why I go back to those records, which is why in the book, we have nearly 1,000 footnotes in the book. We want people to go check and see if this is true or not. We want them to go to the original documents. We want them to know for themselves what truth is. And so generally, they kind of dismiss it, or in the case of the academics who have attacked the book, they said Barton doesn't have a clue what he's talking about, why Jefferson, we all know, was an atheist agnostic, and so they appeal to popular prejudice rather than going to truth as the basis, and that's where we confront them and say, no, here's the documents, and we encourage everyone to see the documents for themselves. It gives you a whole different view of America's founding than what we get today.
All right, let me take a quick break here, David. By the way, to our viewers and listeners, you got to go to wallbuilders.com and check out the website. It is a tremendous resource, one of the most active and I think impacting websites out there. Support David in his ministry and get the book, Jefferson Lies. And we'll come back. Is it true or not true that Jefferson took the Bible and edited it to say what he wanted to say? We'll find out when we return.
I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.
Okay, we're back, and with us today is David Barton. He is the president and founder of WallBuilders, and I tell you, a great organization telling the truth about Christian history in the United States. Go to wallbuilders.com. That's the website. And we're talking to David today about his book that has received a lot of response and has turned out to be controversial. And the book is entitled Jefferson Lies. And he points out there's 7 of the lies about Jefferson in his book. And so we're kind of going through those. So David, is it true that he took the Bible and just, I don't like that, I'll take that out. Yeah, I like that, I'll leave that in. I mean, he kind of did his own cut and paste show.
You know, that's what we hear a lot. And whenever I talk favorably about Jefferson, and Jefferson's a human. He had flaws just like anybody else did. He may have had fewer flaws than a lot of people did. He had a huge impact on the nation and the ideas that have made us exceptional, but he had flaws. And so when I talk favorably about Jefferson, I invariably get particularly Christians who write back and say, how can you talk nice about this guy? Why, he so hated the scriptures. He so hated Christ and the supernatural. He made his own Bible in which he cut out all that supernatural stuff. And so when they say that to me, I always have fun. I always write back, or I talk to them and say, he cut out the miraculous? What are you talking about? And they said, you know, the Jefferson Bible. I said, the Jefferson Bible? Which one are you talking about? And I asked that question specifically because to date, no one's ever been able to answer that question. They say, well, you know, the Jefferson Bible. I said, yeah, no, but he did 2 of them. Are you talking about the one from 1804 or the one from 1820? And they go, the Jefferson Bible. They didn't know there was a difference. I said, well, let me take you through it. 1804, Jefferson has been working intimately with Indian nations, Indian tribes. He's been working to get them missionaries and get them Christian teaching of the tribes. He wants education there. 1803, he signed a treaty with the Kaskaskia Indians in which he used federal funds to pay for Christian ministers to go be with those Indians and to build them a church. I mean, he's using federal funds for this. Well, in 1803, there's a Bennett, an evangelical minister in Scotland, who does a sermon, and one of Jefferson's friends got a hold of a copy and gave it to him. And Edward Dowse gave him the sermon and said, Jefferson, you got to read this. This is great. And this Bennett, Reverend Bennett, says, well, you know, if you want to reach the Indians with the gospel, do not give them a Bible. Why not? Because when they open it up, they might read Leviticus or they might read the genealogies. He said, what you need to do is give them the teachings of Jesus. So Jefferson, in 1804, takes 2 Bibles out of the White House, opens them up, and starts cutting out of them the teachings of Jesus, what we would call the red letters of Jesus. He pastes them end to end. He puts them into a book. His family tells us that he gave that to missionaries and said, look, here's a cheap way to print the teachings of Jesus. You don't have to do the whole Bible. You can get them the red letters of Jesus. And as you go through that, my goodness, Jesus is healing the sick, and he's raising the dead, and he's casting out demons, and he's the Son of God, and there's resurrection and heaven and hell. And so I say, it must not be the 1804 book that you're talking about. It's got to be the 1821, right? Because he cut out all the miracles. And they're kind of flustered at this point. I say, so let me tell you about the 1820 book. In the 10 years leading up to that, Jefferson read every moral book he could on moral teachings because he's a national leader, and he knows that if people can have internal control, internal restraints, you need less government. So he wants a way to make sure people can control themselves. So he read all the moral teachings of Pythagoras and Cato and Seneca and all these guys for thousands of years. And Jefferson, in his own writing, said the moral teachings of Jesus are better than those of any other individual in time, ever. So he says if we can take the moral teachings of Jesus and get people to live by what Jesus taught for behavior, we'll have a great nation. He went through and he took 81 moral teachings of Jesus. And it's the Good Samaritan, it's the Golden Rule, it's the turn the other cheek, it's forgive your enemy, it's love God with all your heart, soul, 81 moral teachings. He put them together in one book, and in 1886, people didn't know that book existed until after his death. In 1886, the Smithsonian Institute actually was able to buy that original copy from Jefferson. And in 1902, a congressman named John Lacey looked at that and said, this is phenomenal. And he started writing op-eds across America, said, look what Jefferson did. He took the teachings, the moral teachings of Jesus. Man, if we could live by this today, think what the nation would be like. And so what they did was in 1902, the U.S. Congress printed 9,000 copies of this book right here. This is a congressionally printed copy. It's The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth. When you open it up, it's a reprint of what Jefferson himself said. It actually has his writing on the cover. It's The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth. And he goes through and he gives you the 81 teachings of Jesus that he included in this. And so what they did, Congress for 50 years gave this book to every senator and every representative and said, if you will live by the teachings of Jesus, you'll stay out of trouble. Now, by the way, the teachings of Jesus in here also have a lot of supernatural here as well. There's angels and heaven and hell and other supernatural things. But his point wasn't theology. His point was get the moral, behavioral teachings of Jesus. So I look at him and say, okay, so 1804, 1820, which one are you talking about where he cut out everything he disagreed with? It doesn't exist. That's another one of the modern myths. And when you go back to the actual documents Jefferson did, it's very clear what he did. And he was not this guy who cut all the scriptures apart to make it say what he wanted. That just wasn't him.
Wow, excellent. I'm going to run out of time, but let me see if I can grab a couple more. Was he a racist?
He's called a racist because he owned slaves. And what people fail to recognize is why is it that you have, for example, pull out a couple of works here. This is Frederick Douglass. Now, Frederick Douglass, I mean, he's a huge civil rights leader. He served in 4 presidential administrations. Why is it that Frederick Douglass praises, here's a black civil rights activist praising Jefferson as a huge pioneer and leader in civil rights and emancipation? Now, today, we would say that can't be. He owned slaves. You have a white abolitionist, John Quincy Adams, does the same thing, praises Jefferson for all of his work to end slavery. And what you find out is Jefferson, in his own writing, says, the laws of Virginia would not allow me to free my own slaves. Matter of fact, he had a neighbor, Robert Carter, who had 500 slaves. He emancipated them all in 1782. 75 years later, they're still trying to free his slaves that he emancipated. That's how bad the laws of Virginia were. So when Jefferson gets elected to the state legislature of Virginia, one of the very first laws he introduces is, let's abolish slavery in Virginia. Well, he gets his brains beat in for introducing such a law. He gets elected to the National Congress, the Continental Congress. He introduces a national bill to end slavery in every state in America. It failed by one vote. And Jefferson in his diary said, oh, to God, that he would have changed one heart. And he just lamented that we failed by one vote to end slavery across America. As President of the United States, he signed laws that limited, and he's the guy who banned the importation of slaves in 1808. He's the guy who sent Christian ministers into Indiana and Illinois to make sure that they were anti-slavery territories so that when they became states, they would be anti-slavery states. He worked to end slavery overseas. He worked in France. He worked in other nations to end slavery. So he's always known as this anti-slavery guy who has the enigma of owning slaves that he didn't want to own. And so today we look at him and say, oh, he's a slave owner. He has to be a racist bigot if he owns slaves. No, not so. He was a huge leader in trying to end slavery in America.
Wow, beautifully said. So given everything you shared with us so far here, David, how in the world could he be criticized for being an atheist and anti-Christian?
Well, he's criticized because we know so little about our own history today. I hate to say this, but in the last election, 70% of voters did not know the Constitution was the supreme law of the land. 62% of voters could not even name the three branches of government. Now, if you can't name the three branches of government, do you think it's likely they know anything about the religious beliefs of Thomas Jefferson? Not so. I mean, if we can't even name the system under which we operate, we know very little about those who gave us that system. So we're at a point in time in American history where we have a historical illiteracy unlike anything in our history. We've never had this. And so that's why, and I have to say, I love the fact what's happening right now. Our book on Jefferson Lies, a New York Times bestseller. You have Glenn Beck, who did a book on George Washington, New York Times bestseller. Newt Gingrich did a book on Trenton and Princeton, New York Times bestseller. John Adams was by David McCullough, New York Times bestseller. Isn't it interesting that Americans are willing to pay money to learn the history they should have learned in school? And that these are best-selling books on the New York Times list. That says something about the hunger we have in America for our own history. But it's just unfortunate that right now we don't teach that history in schools. And a lot of us went through schools at a time where we really weren't taught the facts about our own history.
Well, that in itself is the bottom line, and probably why Jefferson and others are criticized. People just don't know their history, and people will say, well, we are not a Christian nation. Some will say we're post-Christian. That could very well be. But on the other hand, this country only works when it's being governed by a moral people, and we got anything but moral people running for office. So what do we do?
Well, one of the things we got to do is be moral people. I did a book recently with George Barton. It's called U-Turn, and it looks specifically at the beliefs of Christians. 2 out of 3 Christians do not believe that there are moral absolutes. Now, that's Christians. Now, when 2 out of 3 Christians don't believe there are moral absolutes, what kind of leaders do you think they will elect? And that's us. When you look at Christians, actually 68% of Christians believe that adultery is what they call a moral behavior. I'm sorry, that's not moral behavior biblically. So Christians have to get their heads back on biblically, but this is one of the other problems we find is among those who profess Christianity, less than 5% have read through the Bible from cover to cover. We don't even know it's in our own book. And so if we're going to get America turned around, we're going to have to get Christians turned around. And to get Christians turned around, they're going to have to read the guidebook that the Creator gave us, and that's the Bible. And if we read that and live by it, it changes the way we think, which changes what we expect in society, which changes the policies we'll put up with, which changes the kind of people that we'll elect. Now, we'll say what we've seen so far in this election, I was the only one we've really had so far to speak of, massive turnout of Bible-believing Christians, and they carried their faith with them into the polls. That's good news because it doesn't take a huge majority to swing the nation. You look at the American Revolution, only 25% of Americans were patriots. 25% absolutely opposed the revolution, and 50% didn't care just so long as they were on the winning side. When it actually came down to who participated in the American Revolution, only 8% of Americans ever participated in the revolution. So we have a nation that's been given to us by 8% who did something about it. It does not take a majority to make a massive difference. And maybe what we're seeing in Iowa, what we've seen in Iowa will be a good indication of what we're going to see this year across the nation. I certainly hope so. It doesn't take a massive number to make a difference, and maybe we'll see a difference made this year.
David, you're an inspiration, and let me say to our viewers and listeners, get a copy of the book. It's called Jefferson Lies, and look for it. Is it on Amazon? Try to get it where you can. Go to his website, wallbuilders.com. Check out all of David's books and his material there that's available. David, thank you, my friend. Let's connect often. You're inspiring, and keep up the good work. I don't know what you're doing next. Do you have a sequel to this?
I've actually got 3 or 4 books in line right now, so there are many coming out. Several. There's one called Courage, which is the stories of ministers in the American Revolution and what they did to found America. There's a bunch of books on the way.
Okay. Thank you, my friend. God bless you, pal.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay. We'll be right back.